The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under the door of Caleb's cramped Brooklyn apartment, its edges worn as if it had been clutched too tightly. "You're no son of ours," it read, the words in his father's jagged handwriting slicing deeper than any blade could. Caleb, 27, sat frozen, his dark eyes tracing the lines over and over, as if rereading might unravel the betrayal. He'd come out to his parents 2 weeks ago, during a tense dinner at their sprawling estate in Hudson Valley. The table, heavy with roast and resentment, had fallen silent when he said, "I'm gay, and I'm in love with Mateo." His mother's fork clattered. His father's face turned to stone. They didn't yell. They didn't cry. They just pointed to the door and said, "Leave." Now this letter, final, cold, and absolute, severed the last thread of hope that they might change their minds. Caleb's hands trembled as he set the letter down. He glanced at the photo on his nightstand. Him and Mateo, 28, laughing at a street fair, Mateo's arms slung around his shoulders. Mateo, with his warm brown eyes and contagious grin, had been his anchor since they met 2 years ago at a community art gallery in Williamsburg. Caleb, a graphic designer with a quiet intensity, had been drawn to Mateo's unapologetic spirit, a social worker who wore his heart on his sleeve and fought for every kid he counseled. They'd built a life together, small but real, in a city that felt like it could hold all their dreams. But now, with his family's rejection burning in his chest, Caleb felt the ground shift beneath him. He didn't tell Mateo about the letter right away. Instead, he walked to their favorite coffee shop in Park Slope, where Mateo was waiting, sketching in a notebook. The autumn air was crisp, and the streets buzzed with couples pushing strollers and dog walkers dodging fallen leaves. Mateo looked up, his smile fading as he saw Caleb's expression. "What's wrong, amor?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. Caleb slid the letter across the table. Mateo's jaw tightened as he read, his fingers crumpling the edges. "They don't deserve you," he said finally, his voice low but fierce. "You're more than their hate." But Caleb couldn't shake the weight of it. The years of trying to please his parents, the memories of his mother's hymns and his father's stern pride, all erased in a single sentence. He felt like a ghost in his own life. That night, they lay in bed, the city's hum filtering through their thin apartment walls. Mateo traced circles on Caleb's back, whispering, "We'll make our own family, you and me." But Caleb's mind was racing. He didn't want to just survive this rejection. He wanted to reclaim something, to prove he was more than the son they'd discarded. An idea, reckless and raw, sparked in his chest. "What if we didn't just move on?" he said, sitting up. "What if we showed them I'm still here?" Mateo raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" Caleb's voice was steady, though his heart pounded. "Their estate's got that empty lot next door. Nobody's bought it in years. What if I built a house there, right next to them? Let them see me, us, every day, living our truth." Mateo stared, then laughed, a mix of disbelief and admiration. "You're crazy, you know that? But I'm in. Let's build a home they can't ignore." The next morning, Caleb called a realtor. The lot, a half-acre of overgrown grass and wildflowers, was still for sale, priced low because of its proximity to his parents' looming colonial. Caleb's savings, scraped together from freelance gigs, covered the down payment. Mateo chipped in what he could, though his social worker salary was modest. They didn't have a plan, just a fire in their chests and a shared vision of a house that would stand as a testament to their love and Caleb's defiance. By week's end, they'd signed the papers. Caleb stood on the lot, the wind carrying the faint scent of his parents' rose garden from next door. He imagined their faces when they saw construction begin. Would they rage, ignore him, or, in some buried part of their hearts, would they feel the weight of what they'd lost? He didn't know, But as Mateo slipped his hand into Caleb's, their fingers intertwining, he felt something stronger than pain: purpose. The first hurdle was money. Building a house wasn't cheap, and their savings wouldn't cover it all. Caleb spent nights researching modular homes, affordable, sustainable, and quick to assemble. He found a company in Albany that could deliver a sleek, modern design: glass walls, cedar accents, and a rooftop deck. It wasn't his parents' gaudy mansion, but it would be theirs, built on their terms. Mateo, ever practical, suggested crowdfunding. "People love a good story," he said. "And ours? It's a hell of a story." They launched a campaign, sharing their truth. A gay couple building a home next to the family that rejected them. Caleb hesitated at first, wary of airing their pain publicly, but Mateo's confidence was infectious. "Let the world see who we are," he said. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from strangers, queer activists, and even a few of Caleb's old art school friends. Messages of support flooded their inbox. "You're showing them love wins. Build that house and live loud." Within a month, they'd raised enough to break ground. But not everyone was cheering. One evening, as Caleb and Mateo walked the lot, sketching ideas for a garden, a car slowed on the road. Caleb's father, Richard, stared from the driver's seat, his face a mask of disdain. He didn't speak, just drove off, leaving a cloud of dust. Caleb's stomach churned, but Mateo squeezed his hand. "He doesn't get to define us," he said. "This land is ours now." Construction began in spring, the lot transforming from a tangle of weeds to a leveled foundation. Caleb threw himself into the project, designing every detail: the open kitchen for Mateo's late-night cooking experiments, the skylight above their future bedroom. Mateo balanced his work at the youth center with site visits, charming the contractors with coffee runs and his endless optimism. They were a team, their love a quiet rebellion against the silence from next door. Yet the closer the house came to completion, the more Caleb felt the weight of his parents' absence. He'd catch glimpses of them: his mother, Ellen, tending her roses, his father mowing the lawn, always looking away, as if he were invisible. It stung, but it also fueled him. Every nail, every beam, was a declaration: "I'm still here. I'm still your son." One afternoon, as Caleb hammered stakes for a fence, a shadow fell over him. He looked up to see his mother standing at the property line, her face pale. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why here?" Caleb wiped sweat from his brow, his heart racing. "Because you told me to leave," he said. "But I'm not going anywhere. This is my home now." She stared, her lips parting as if to speak, then turned and walked away. Caleb watched her go, his chest tight with a mix of grief and resolve. He didn't need her approval anymore. He had Mateo, their house, and a community that believed in them. But as he drove another stake into the earth, he couldn't shake the question: could they ever rebuild what was broken? The house rose steadily, its glass walls catching the morning light like a beacon. Caleb and Mateo spent every weekend on the lot, their hands calloused from hauling lumber and their clothes dusted with sawdust. The contractors, a scrappy crew from Poughkeepsie, grew fond of them, cracking jokes about the love shack while hammering beams into place. But the shadow of Caleb's parents loomed larger as the house took shape. Their silence was louder than any argument, a wall as solid as the one Caleb was building. Mateo noticed Caleb's tension, the way his shoulders hunched when he glanced at his parents' house. One evening, as they sat on a pile of plywood eating takeout, Mateo nudged him. "You're carrying them with you," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Don't let their hate live in our home." Caleb nodded, but it wasn't that simple. He remembered summers in that house, his father teaching him to fish in the creek, his mother baking pies for the church fair. Those memories clashed with the present. where his parents treated him like a stranger. He wanted to hate them, but love was stubborn, clinging to his heart like damp earth. The community, though, kept them grounded. Their crowdfunding page became a hub of support, with local queer groups organizing work parties to help paint and plant. A trans woman named Aisha, who ran a bakery in town, brought trays of pastries and stories of her own family's rejection. "You're building more than a house," she told Caleb. "You're building hope for kids like us." Her words stuck with him, a reminder that this wasn't just about defiance. It was about creating something bigger. But not everyone in Hudson Valley was kind. One morning, Caleb arrived to find faggots spray-painted across the foundation. His stomach dropped, the word a slap that echoed his parents' letter. Mateo, furious, grabbed a can of paint to cover it, but Caleb stopped him. "Leave it," he said, his voice low. "Let them see we're not scared." They painted over it later, but not before posting a photo online with the caption, "Hate won't stop us. Love builds stronger." The post went viral, drawing more donations and messages of solidarity. It also drew attention, some unwanted. A local news crew showed up, cameras rolling as Caleb and Mateo worked. The reporter, a young woman with sharp eyes, asked, "Why build here? So close to the family that rejected you?" Caleb froze, the question cutting too close. Mateo stepped in, his arm around Caleb's waist. "Because love doesn't run," he said. "We're not hiding. This is our home, and we're proud of it." The segment aired that night, and by morning their story was trending. Support poured in, but so did hate mail, anonymous letters calling them sinners, demanding they leave. Caleb tried to shrug it off, but the hate gnawed at him. One night, he woke from a nightmare. His parents' house on fire, their faces at the window, blaming him. He slipped out of bed, leaving Mateo sleeping, and walked to the lot. The half-finished house stood under the stars, its frame a skeleton of their dreams. He sat on the foundation, the cold concrete grounding him. "I'm doing this for us," he whispered, as if the house could hear him. "But why does it still hurt?" The next day, Mateo suggested a break. They drove to a nearby lake, the water shimmering under a late spring sun. Mateo pulled Caleb into the shallows, splashing him until they were both laughing, soaked and breathless. For a moment, the weight lifted. "This is why we're doing it," Mateo said, pulling Caleb close. "For days like this, for us." Caleb kissed him, the taste of lake water and sunlight mingling, and felt the spark of defiance reignite. Back at the site, progress was swift. The walls were up, the roof nearly done. Caleb designed a mural for the living room, a vibrant swirl of colors symbolizing resilience. Mateo, meanwhile, planned a community garden, inviting neighbors to plant alongside them. Most were supportive, but Caleb's parents remained a ghost in the background. He'd see their car pull out, their curtains twitch, but they never spoke. It was as if the lot line was a chasm no one could cross. Then came the zoning board. A notice arrived, claiming the house violated setback regulations. A complaint filed anonymously, but Caleb knew who was behind it. His father had served on the board years ago. This was his move. At the hearing, Caleb and Mateo stood before a panel of stern faces, their hands clasped tightly. Caleb spoke, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "This house isn't just a building. It's our life. We're not breaking laws. We're building a future." The room was silent. Then Aisha stood, followed by others from their crowdfunding community, each testifying to the house's importance. The board ruled in their favor, but Caleb felt no victory. His father's absence in the room was louder than any verdict. As summer approached, the house neared completion. Caleb and Mateo moved in, their furniture a mix of thrift store finds and gifts from supporters. The first night, they sat on the rooftop deck, the stars bright above. Next door, Caleb's parents' house was dark, its windows blank. "Do you think they'll ever come around?" Caleb asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mateo took his hand. "Maybe, maybe not. But we've got each other, and that's enough." Caleb wanted to believe it, but as he looked at the house next door, he couldn't help but wonder if love could ever bridge a divide so wide. The house was alive now, its walls echoing with laughter and the clink of glasses during their housewarming party. Friends from Brooklyn and locals who'd followed their journey filled the space, their voices mingling with the scent of Mateo's homemade empanadas. Aisha hung fairy lights in the garden, while a drag queen named Leo, who donated to the crowdfunding, performed an impromptu lip sync on the rooftop deck. Caleb watched it all, his heart full but heavy. His parents' house, just yards away, was silent, its lights off as if refusing to acknowledge the joy next door. The party was a triumph, but it didn't erase the ache. Caleb caught himself glancing at the property line, half expecting his mother to appear, her face soft with regret. She didn't. Instead, a neighbor mentioned seeing Ellen at the grocery store, her eyes red, avoiding questions about the new house. Caleb pushed the thought away, focusing on Mateo, who was dancing with a group of kids from his youth center. Mateo's joy was infectious, but Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was incomplete. The next week, reality hit. A pipe burst in the kitchen, flooding the new hardwood floors. Caleb spent hours mopping, his frustration boiling over. "Why does it feel like everything's against us?" he snapped at Mateo, who was calmly calling a plumber. Mateo raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Because we're doing something big, amor. The universe tests you when you're building something real." His calm grounded Caleb, but the repairs drained their savings, a reminder of how fragile their dream was. Then came the letters, not from his parents, but from their church, a conservative congregation Caleb had grown up in. The notes were polite but pointed, urging him to repent and leave this sinful life. One included a photo of the house with a Bible verse scrawled across it, "Flee from sexual immorality." Caleb burned it in the backyard, the flames licking the night air. Mateo found him there, staring at the embers. "They're scared of us," Mateo said, wrapping an arm around him. "Scared of what we represent." Caleb nodded, but the words felt hollow. He wasn't just fighting his parents' rejection now. He was fighting a whole system, a town that whispered behind their backs. Yet the community they'd built pushed back. Aisha organized a pride event in the town square, with their house as the unofficial headquarters. Volunteers painted rainbow flags on the garden fence, and Mateo led a workshop for queer youth, sharing their story. Caleb designed flyers, pouring his pain into art that screamed resilience. The event drew hundreds, a vibrant rebuke to the hate mail. But as Caleb watched the crowd, he saw his father's car drive by, slow and deliberate, before speeding off. The tension peaked one humid July evening. Caleb was planting marigolds in the garden when he heard footsteps. His father stood at the property line, his face etched with exhaustion. "This needs to stop," Richard said, his voice low. "You're embarrassing us. The church, the neighbors, they're talking." Caleb stood, dirt smudged on his jeans. "I'm not here to embarrass you," he said. "I'm here to live. You're the one who made this a fight." Richard's jaw tightened. "You chose this. You could have stayed, been normal." "Normal?" Caleb's voice cracked. "You mean hide who I am? Lie to myself? I'm your son, Dad. Why can't you see that?" Richard looked away, his hands clenched. For a moment, Caleb thought he saw a flicker of doubt in his father's eyes. But then Richard turned and walked back to his house, the door slamming behind him. Caleb sank to his knees, the marigolds forgotten. Mateo found him there, pulling him into a hug. "You said what you needed to," he whispered. "That's enough for now." But it wasn't. Caleb threw himself into the house, perfecting every detail. The mural, the bookshelves, the skylight that bathed their bedroom in starlight. He wanted it to be flawless, a shield against the world. Mateo, meanwhile, focused outward, building ties with the community. He started a support group for queer youth, using their living room as a safe space. Kids like Jamal, a 16-year-old who'd been kicked out by his aunt, found refuge there. Caleb watched Mateo with them, his heart swelling with pride but also envy. Mateo seemed so sure, so unshaken, while Caleb still carried his parents' rejection like a stone. One night, Jamal stayed late, sharing his story of sleeping on friends' couches. "You guys give me hope," he said, his voice small. "This house, it's like proof we can make it." Caleb's throat tightened. He realized then that their home wasn't just for them. It was a beacon for others, a place where broken families could be rebuilt, not with blood but with love. As summer faded, the house felt complete, but Caleb's heart didn't. He wrote a letter to his parents, not expecting a reply. "I'm still your son," he wrote. "I built this house to show you I'm not going anywhere, but I miss you." He slipped it under their door, his hands shaking. Days passed with no response. He told himself he didn't care, but every time he saw their house, dark and silent, the ache grew. Then, one morning, a small package appeared on their doorstep. Inside was a photo from Caleb's childhood, him at 5, smiling in his mother's garden. No note, no explanation, just the photo, its edges worn. Caleb held it, tears blurring his vision. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. A crack in the wall. Fall painted Hudson Valley in fiery hues, the trees mirroring the intensity of Caleb and Mateo's life. Their house was now a home, its walls filled with art, laughter, and the voices of queer youth who found refuge there. The community garden bloomed, a riot of color that drew neighbors, some curious, some supportive, others wary. Caleb and Mateo had become local figures, their story a quiet revolution in a town unaccustomed to change. But the house next door remained a silent fortress, its occupants ghosts in Caleb's life. The photo from his mother haunted him. He kept it on the mantel, its presence a question mark. Was it a gesture of remorse? A taunt? He didn't know, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. Mateo, ever the optimist, saw it as a step. "She's reaching out in her own way," he said one evening as they cooked dinner, the scent of garlic and tomatoes filling the air. "Give it time." "Time for what?" Caleb snapped, stirring the sauce too hard. "For them to pretend they didn't throw me out? I don't want their crumbs." But his voice betrayed him, cracking with the weight of wanting something he couldn't name. Mateo set down his knife, crossing the kitchen to wrap his arms around Caleb. "You're allowed to hope, amor. It doesn't make you weak." Caleb leaned into him, the anger melting into exhaustion. He wanted to believe Mateo, but hope felt like a trap when it came to his parents. Life pressed on. The support group grew, with Jamal and others bringing friends who needed a safe space. Caleb found purpose in mentoring them, teaching art classes in the garage they'd converted into a studio. He watched kids like Mia, a non-binary teen with a talent for sketching, find confidence in their work. "You're like a big brother," Mia told him one day, their words hitting harder than expected. Caleb realized he was building the family he'd lost, one connection at a time. But the outside world wasn't done testing them. A local pastor, emboldened by the church's letters, began preaching against the house of sin in sermons that spread like wildfire. Protesters appeared one weekend, a small but loud group waving signs outside the property line. "God hates your choice," one read. Caleb's blood boiled, but Mateo, calm as ever, suggested they counter with kindness. They set up a table with coffee and Aisha's pastries, inviting passers-by to talk. Most protesters ignored them, but a few stopped, disarmed by Mateo's warmth. One, a young man named Tim, lingered, his sign drooping. "I don't know why I'm here," he admitted. "My dad made me come." Caleb saw himself in Tim, caught between loyalty and truth. "You don't have to agree with him," Caleb said quietly. "You can choose your own path." Tim left without a word, but the next day, a note appeared in their mailbox. "I'm sorry. I'm questioning too." It was unsigned, but Caleb knew. It was another crack, small but real. The protests fizzled out, but the pastor's words lingered, fueling whispers at the grocery store and glares at the gas station. Caleb felt exposed, his home a target. He installed security cameras, his paranoia growing with every creak in the night. Mateo, sensing his unease, suggested a trip to New York City for their anniversary. "We need to remember why we're doing this," he said. They spent a weekend wandering museums, eating street food, and dancing in a queer club until dawn. In the city's embrace, Caleb felt free, untethered from the weight of Hudson Valley. But back home, reality waited. One evening, as Caleb painted in the studio, he heard shouting. He ran outside to find Mateo facing off with a man at the property line. His father. Richard's face was red, his voice sharp. "You're ruining our lives," he yelled. "This house, your lifestyle. It's a disgrace." Mateo stood firm, his voice steady. "The only disgrace is how you treated your son." Caleb stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Dad, stop. This is our home. You don't get to tear it down." Richard's eyes met Caleb's, and for a moment, something softened. But then he turned, storming back to his house. Caleb's knees buckled, and Mateo caught him. "He's wrong," Mateo whispered. "You're not a disgrace. You're everything." The confrontation shook Caleb, but it also clarified something. He was done waiting for his parents' approval. He poured his energy into the house, the youth group, and Mateo. They hosted a winter solstice party, the garden lit with lanterns, music spilling into the night. Neighbors came, some hesitant, others embracing the warmth. Caleb felt the house breathe, its walls holding stories of resilience and love. Then, one snowy morning, a letter arrived, not in his parents' handwriting, but from the church. It was an invitation to a reconciliation meeting. Caleb's first instinct was to burn it, but Mateo stopped him. "What if it's a chance?" he asked. "Not for them, but for you, to say what you need to say." Caleb agreed, though his stomach churned. At the church, he and Mateo faced a small group. The pastor, a few elders, and, to his shock, his mother. She sat in the back, her eyes fixed on the floor. The pastor spoke of healing, but his words felt like a lecture. Caleb stood, his voice steady. "I didn't come to be fixed. I came to tell you I'm whole. My home, my love, my life. It's not a sin. It's mine." He looked at his mother, willing her to meet his gaze. She didn't, but her hands trembled. As they left, Caleb felt lighter, as if he'd shed a layer of pain. He didn't need their forgiveness. He'd forgiven himself for hoping they'd change. Winter settled over Hudson Valley, blanketing the house in snow. Caleb and Mateo's home was a warm haven, its windows glowing against the cold. The youth group had become a lifeline, with kids like Jamal and Mia spending weekends painting, cooking, or just talking. The house was more than a building now. It was a sanctuary, proof that love could thrive where hate had tried to take root. But Caleb's heart still carried a bruise, one that ached when he saw his parents' house, its chimney smoke curling into the sky. The church meeting had left him raw but resolute. He'd said his piece, and though his mother's silence stung, it freed him. He focused on the present. Mateo's laughter, the kids' growth, the community that rallied around them. Aisha proposed a spring art festival, with Caleb's murals as the centerpiece. Mateo planned to expand the support group, dreaming of a network across the state. Their life was full, yet Caleb couldn't shake the need for closure. One icy morning, he found a note tucked into the mailbox, written in his mother's careful script. "Can we talk, Mom?" His heart raced. He showed it to Mateo, who nodded. "Go. Hear her out. But don't let her hurt you again." Caleb walked to his parents' porch, the familiar creak of the steps stirring memories. Ellen opened the door, her face pale but softer than he remembered. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and old books, unchanged from his childhood. They sat in the living room, the silence heavy. "I don't know how to do this," Ellen began, her voice shaky. "I was raised to believe certain things. But seeing your house, your life, it's made me question everything." Caleb waited, his throat tight. She continued, "I don't understand it, your love, but I see it's real. I'm sorry for what we did." Her eyes met his, tears brimming. "I want to know you again. It wasn't everything." His father wasn't there, and her words weren't a full embrace. But it was a start. Caleb nodded, unable to speak. He left with a promise to meet again, his heart a tangle of hope and caution. Back home, he told Mateo, who pulled him close. "One step at a time," Mateo said. "You're stronger than their mistakes." They stood on the rooftop deck, the snow falling softly, their house a beacon against the dark. Next door, a single light glowed in his parents' window, a small sign of change. Spring came, and with it, the art festival. The garden burst with color, Caleb's murals drawing crowds. Mia's sketches hung beside his, and Jamal performed a spoken-word piece about found family. The community turned out, their support a loud answer to the hate of the past. Ellen came, alone, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. She didn't speak, but she stayed, watching Caleb and Mateo with a look Caleb hadn't seen in years: pride. As the festival ended, Caleb and Mateo sat in their garden, the air warm with promise. "We did it," Caleb said, his hand in Mateo's. "We built more than a house." Mateo smiled, his eyes bright. "We built a home, and it's ours." Caleb looked at the house next door, its walls no longer a barrier but a challenge met. He didn't know if his father would ever come around, or if his mother's steps would lead to more. But he knew this. He and Mateo had created something unbreakable, a life rooted in love and resilience. The house stood as proof, not just to his parents but to the world, that they could face rejection and still choose to build, to love, to live. And in that truth, Caleb found peace.